you know, you wouldn't go like into some other language or technology and just like start throwing stuff at the computer and see if it works, and if it does, then okay, that's good, and we'll just move on. But that's what happens a lot of times with JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, just because it's a kind of frustrating place to work sometimes, and the developer tools make a big difference for that. So this is what I used to do when I first started writing JavaScript and something wasn't working, is I would, inside of some logic, I would like just alert some value, and that value would almost always end up being like an array, so you don't get anything useful when you say alert array. It just says, hey, I'm an array. And
I still develop JavaScript like this.
Yeah, yeah, and that's pretty common. I think it took some time to not do this, and this is why people hate JavaScript, I think. So pretty much any browser you use has developer tools. Most of them these days are built in. Firefox is one of the major exceptions currently, where you download Firebug. Opera has built in, if you're an Opera user, which I know there's one person in here who is. And my favorite name for any software is when you name it after a keyboard shortcut. So the F12 developer tool, that's IE's version, which do work, kind of. So there's easy keyboard shortcuts to open them, or you can just right-click and say inspect element, and that'll open it up too. The first thing that really drew me to use developer tools was that it had a console. So like instead of alert some object, and that gives, I guess this browser's a little better, but I get this kind of disruptive alert message. You can basically just say log, and I usually have a log function defined that does this for me, but console.log, and the cool thing is that you can log out kind of mixed types of data, arrays, DOM elements, collections with arrays as their values, and all kinds of stuff, and it generally does a pretty good job of like printing out that data for you. Yes. That better? So the developer tools are all built in HTML and JavaScript, so that's why you can just, and it reloads all this stuff instantly, so that's probably not all that useful, but so there's also a function that I have in So there's also a function, console.dir, which sometimes you might log out, say, the body on your page, but and that gives you this, so you can see what it is, but that's not really what you want, because maybe you want to look at like a property on it, or like a attribute or class list. So in that case, console.dir, and it gives you like a kind of tree view where I can here navigate through and look at everything on the body. And the console also is kind of just a redeveloped print loop for what's going on your page. So also, there's timing events, which is nice. I've often, when trying to figure out why something's slow, would get a date, I'd do something, and then I would log out what the date was after that happened. There's a much easier way to track that, which is basically you say console.time, you start timing, and then time end, you pass the same string, and it'll kind of pre-print out how long that took. So I have some random timeout here. I reload, and every time it's somewhat random. But it's really useful if you're doing kind of AJAX requests or long-running things that are asynchronous and out of your current event loop. And then also any JavaScript you do is going to execute that input. So, you know, you can do that. Sometimes I do this because I'm not very good with remembering how to do regexes, so I'm like, okay, I think that's how you do it, and then I think if you do this, it'll only clear out the multiple spaces or something. Like, I don't remember how to do that stuff, so I just do it in the console, and then I'm like, okay, that's what I want, and then I'll copy it from here and paste it into the actual project I'm working on. And there's a full list. There's actually a lot more stuff you can do with the console, but I was just trying to kind of hit the highlights, like the things that I use every day. And the rest of those things are this list. So this is one that's, the $0 is pretty cool. If I'm in here and I basically highlight an object, so I highlight this H2 which says enter a color. From here I can say $0 and that's that H2. So sometimes when you're working in things, you want to just, you don't, like that element might not have an ID and it might be a complicated selector. So like if you're used to jQuery or some other framework, you might be used to saying things like, give me all the H2s on the page. Well, you may have 10 H2s and the one you want to change might not have an ID. So to just be able to quickly say $0 as a shorthand for that is pretty useful. $$ is a shortcut to do like query selector all, which is kind of like using CSS syntax to select an element. jQuery has this same thing. So I could say H2, which means give me all the H2 tags on the page, or I could say give me all the things that have a class of CF, and that's going to give me those. And then if you do by pound would mean by ID, you can space things. So give me all the children of an input container, direct children. Here we could say give me all the children of an input container, and it's a pretty useful way to just kind of traverse through elements. And generally, like, I don't know, like, what percentage of you guys are like A, in the browser a lot doing front end stuff, and then B, using jQuery or some other framework similar, but you're probably going to have a syntax like this that you're using in your code if you are doing those two things. I suck at XPaths, and sometimes I have to use them like for Selenium and stuff, and I like 50% of the time I put the slashes the wrong way. So I just come in and I'm like, oh wait, it's not that way, because I really did just think it was that way, and there, that worked. And then I'm like, okay, XPaths have that, and I couldn't tell you anything else about that, but you can do it inside of the browser, which is nice, because like at work we wrote Selenium tests, which are basically you're gonna like define what you want to happen on the page, and natively that supports XPath. So if I'm like, I want to click this button, I need to come up with a good XPath for that button, and if I just guess like in the code, then I have to rerun the whole test, which may be long, and I always get the XPath wrong. And then I have to guess again and retry it. So when I figured out this, I was pretty happy. So if you're inside of the console and you just say inspect, that's going to pull open the node you pass inside of this, this top part. And once you're inside of this top part, you can do a lot of stuff, which I'll get more into that on, I think, the next slide. Monitor events is another thing you can do. Like, for instance, sometimes, right now this isn't doing anything, but I might be wondering, like, I want to do something when somebody presses enter on a text box, but I can't remember what, like, you have to basically check a key code to figure out inside of the event, like, was it the enter key? And I can never remember what the keys are because they're just numbers. So I could just say, and now every time I do anything here, it's going to log it out for me. So then all I have to do is press enter, and then I'm like, oh, okay, enter is 13. So I do that sometimes, and it gets a little unruly if you monitor all the events. So you can say, like, just mouse. So that can be useful too. Oh, and if you press, and this is kind of, a lot of this stuff is not specific to Chrome dev tools, like it's going to work with Firebug, it's going to work with F12 developer tools and Dragonfly and all that, but some of them are, like, if you're on a different tab here, which I'll go over some of these tabs, and you press escape, it'll pull open your console real quick. So if I'm like, sometimes I'll be in here, and what I'll do is I'll be working with a designer or somebody, and he'll be like, man, I hate serifs or whatever, so I'm gonna change this to Verdana, and he's like, well, that's like not the right size, so we'll kind of sit there and mess with stuff until he kind of signs off on it. And then I'll take that and just like copy it in, you know, usually like that, and then it's there, and it's easier than reloading every time. So that inspector panel is kind of what I was just showing, and that's why I said that sometimes I'll be sitting there and we'll just kind of play with it, like with stuff like box shadows and backgrounds, and it's just kind of like, oh, we'll make it look right here with, you know, two people sitting there, and just copy it in, and so there's keyboard shortcuts on these values. If it's a number value and you press up, it goes up 1. If you do shift, it goes up 10. Up or down 10. There's sometimes these work on other types of things, but not always. So colors are the most likely one that I would be playing with, but you know, like I found this gradient online that has like this transparent kind of overlay, and it's got multiple images, so I don't really know what these numbers do sometimes, so I'll just like sit there and be like, oh, perfect, and I'll copy that back in or whatever, and so. Also, this is a somewhat new feature, which it looks like it might be a little messed up with the font size that I set the developer tools to, but sometimes you're trying to style something, like something just breaks when you hover over it, and you're always trying to style it, but to get over to it, you're not hovered on it anymore, and it's kind of a silly problem, because I'm like, oh wait, no, it's, why is it green? You know, so anymore you can press this little guy and guess it's on A, but if I basically can toggle the hover state somewhat permanently, or focus, that might be useful, like if I'm on a text box here, and I want to see what it looks like when it's focused. Also on this panel you have things like for just basic DOM modifications. So if I just wanted to like change text, you can just click in and change it. You can, you know, you can do whatever you want on attributes too, which can be nice. Like so if I had added a class on the body and altered it, I can just go in and add that class straight inside the DevTools, and it reflects right away, just as if I reloaded it. So I don't know if that was an obvious change, but and that's I would say like the basics for this first panel, elements panel that I use, which is usually if you're doing kind of CSS or HTML changes. The next one that I use is scripts panel. So that gives you like the basic things that you would expect from pretty much any other environment you were working in that like is just kind of missing in JavaScript a lot of times, because something on some event's not going to work, and then you're trying to figure out where it's not working, so you're putting in a bunch of log statements, and it's, you know, you may be causing some side effects by doing that, and all kinds of things happen. So if you like hop over to the scripts panel, you can see a list of all the JavaScripts files that you've included. And the other really nice thing you can do is you can just set a breakpoint like wherever you want. So right now I have a callback. I made this color picker plugin, and I have a callback that says on a move event, call color picker move. So color picker move is a function, and all I do right now is log something. So you can see there that that's happening, and like sometimes you may not know exactly what color is in that context, meaning the function parameter. So you can click here and put a breakpoint, and then what happens is the next time you move, you go into this debugging mode, and you can see, okay, this happened here and here and here, and you can go all the way back to where that event originally was handled. So in my case, it was handled in the jQuery file because I'm using jQuery to bind it, but you can kind of walk up the tree here and see, okay, this is the color picker plugin, okay, here's where the problem is right here on mine. So the other cool thing is once you're inside of this breakpoint, I can go through a tree view of like the parameter, and I can see all the functions that it has and all the settings on it and everything. And if I go over to the console, which I'm just going to go ahead and yeah. So just ignore that. Yeah, it's because I increased the font size. Never want to do that. But so here I'm in the breakpoint now. The cool thing is now in the console I am in the scope of where the execution was when I paused it. So there's a variable called color, because it's passed into the function that got paused on. So I could say color.toRGB string, and if you see, you kind of get auto-completion here if you're just jumping through objects, and I can see I can play with it. So from here I could say something like, you know, and I can set it just straight in from the console. Now I figure out, okay, that's what I want this function to do, is I want, when I move this color picker, I want the background to change. So I'll go ahead and just kill this breakpoint, because I don't need it anymore. I'll go over here, and I'll say on move, I actually already have that function here just to save time. I can say, so now when I reload, as I move, you kind of get this effect, you know, combined with the gradient, it's kind of a cool effect on the background. So the other thing is, if I want to go ahead and bind, because I want not just when I drag this, I also want, when I press, I want to be able to like type in a color here and press set. And I want that to do the same thing basically as what happens when I drag this thing. So I could say something like set color button, and I would usually probably do this with jQuery or something, but you don't necessarily need to get the console to work. But I would say, when I press the set color button, I actually want to force the color picker to be at what's currently in the text box, and I also want to set the background to that. So I'll show you what some of the event kind of how you can debug and work with events from the tools here. So inside of the scripts panel, and this may be different in Firebug and some of the others too, they may not even have all of the same stuff, but I can go event listener breakpoint, and I can say break on a click that's handled by my code. So I come in here and press set, and it breaks because I've set that event listener here. So now I could skip this and let it just run, or I can step through each line and look at what the scope is like. So now that this line's happening, value is set. It was undefined before, but now it's set. So I let it run. Sometimes that's obnoxious. So as I step through, like right now, value is undefined. Okay, I'm just setting it to text box value, so there's not much that can go wrong. But sometimes you're calling a function, and maybe you're not sure what the return value is, and you want to be able, instead of just kind of, say it's not a number or a string, it's some kind of weird type, and you want to be able to click through and inspect all the properties on that type. It can be nice to do it from this environment instead of doing it from like a console.log or an alert. And you can see it, you know, kind of like, I guess if I move this up here, you can see that, you know, there are side effects that are happening. And the other thing, this button, like, you can deactivate breakpoints, so that kind of obnoxious thing that happens when every time I click on anything it does it, you can temporarily disable that and re-enable it. So now when I set orange, you can see that there's these side effects happening as I call functions. Like set background, now all of a sudden the background changed. So that's that. Network panel is, on a project like this, which is kind of just a silly demo of some of the things you can do, it's not all that useful, but it still is in a lot of ways. Like, it's pretty cool. So I can go and look at every single resource that got requested to load this page. And for each one, you can click in and look at all the HTTP headers that got sent and received. I can look at kind of, depending on the content type of the file, they'll show a different preview. Like if it's an image, you'll see the image. But if it's text, it's going to do some kind of syntax highlighting on it and stuff. So I can go and look at the CSS file that came through here. Response is the same in this case. You can look at cookies, and you can also kind of dig into like, why is it so slow? Because that's a lot of the times when you're looking at the network panel, that's why you're looking at it, because something's taking like forever to load. And
it's a nice way to hack sites that try to protect images too.
Yeah,
those meme shots I had up there, they put like some obnoxious transparent GIF on top of stuff. You can just right click and download, but it was available in network panel. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel?
Pretty
You
good.
wouldn't download a car, would you?
So, but the network panel gets really cool when you're doing like Ajax type of things, which maybe you're using. So now this is called random.php, but really what it's a favorite color predictor. And so a lot of times when I'm like kind of, I guess like stubbing out functionality, I'll just do some, because another thing that I'm really bad at remembering is how those jQuery and other library, how their API works. Like what are the return values on a $.get, which basically performs an Ajax request for you. If you do .get, it returns different than if you do .ajax and all kinds of things, and I just don't remember it. So I'll just basically tell it to get, and then I'll just send it to a function that just logs out the arguments. Better stop that. So by default, this isn't enabled. Here, I'll show you this. So usually, if I press predict favorite color here, what it does is it goes and sends off a request to a file on my server. And typically, there's the return value. So I figure out what I want is actually the first argument here, because arguments is kind of a special name in JavaScript that's an array-like object on the arguments. So if I come in here and say color, then the fact that color is your argument 0 is true. So that's the only reason. I don't know if that was clear about that, but that's why I log it out that way. Anyhow, so something that I always enable on developer tools when I first start using it is this log XML HTTP request, because then when I do it, I get this kind of message that like, hey, some Ajax happened. And when you're on a page that has a lot of that going on, it can be really useful, because right before something breaks or something changes, I see, oh, this happened, so I can click on this link, and it jumps me over to, I guess, the resource panel, but what I usually want is the network panel. I can go and click in here and look at all the same stuff. So as an example, if let me clear both of these logs. As I predict them, this is showing up here on my network timeline. These Ajax requests are going out. So I polished up my PHP skills here before I came over, and I got this working. So now if I press predict favorite color, you'll see I hover over here and it says, okay, the DNS lookup took 0 milliseconds because I'm hitting localhost. The connecting took almost no time, sending took no time, but it took 1 second for it to return. So the server's slow. And receiving took no time because there's almost no data that I'm actually sending back. So if I'm sending like a huge file, like an image or something, some of those times might be different, you know. And you can see it as it's happening. So if something is quite slow, you can kind of do that. And I can see the content type that got sent back. This is like, if you work in an environment where you're kind of passing JSON back and forth, it's super useful to be able to go to this preview panel and see it rather than trying to like somewhat print it onto the page or alert it out or look at your server logs, or like, there's all kinds of crazy things you could do, but it's real easy to just open it up and see it right there. And then kind of the last panel, I guess, I was going to talk about was the audits panel, which like, even if you don't work really in the front end at all, like say you do back end stuff and you hate the browser and like it's the necessary evil, I just want to get like the data out into it and whatever. Even if that's kind of your case, you should probably at work or whatever project you have, just open up your project and go to the audits panel inside of here and say reload page and run. And what it's basically going to do is it's going to give you, it basically reloads the page, tracks your all the requests it sends out, all the headers, everything, images, and sometimes I have problems because I'm running on like a custom version of this, but that might happen on
It would only happen if you press that button, right?
yeah, because I'm not actually running any PHP on. Maybe I'll just hop over here and show off Firebug, because this is one thing that Firebug does way better than Chrome DevTools for some reason. Sometimes that audits panel is quite buggy. So I'm inside of Firefox now, and I don't really know how to make this font size bigger, so I apologize for that. But if you go to the YSlow panel, which is a tool that Yahoo developed, and you say run test, this is going to give you, it's just going to give you like a grade. And it says, here's all the things your site does well, and here's all the things it does bad. And there's lots of useful tips, some of which are more important than others, but a lot of times you'll see if, you might have a site that delivers like 20 JavaScript files and 10 CSS files, and it'll say, hey, that's really slow, you should combine all of those into, like during a build task, and just deliver one of those files. You can click through each of these kind of issues. It tells me like here, I'm running this on like the built-in kind of Apache server on OS X, and I'm not setting expires headers. So what that means is every time I reload this page, it's just going to go and re-download the files, as opposed to checking to see if it needs to. So potentially a real small request that says like, do I need to download this? Yes or no. Instead, it's going to have to download the whole file. And that can, some of these things are so, I said like pick the low-hanging fruit. Some of them are kind of like a rabbit hole where it's like, hey,